Hi everybody, welcome to the afternoon sessions. We are very excited to be back with you and to have an amazing panel today. And then we've got a few more happening right up to the end, which the final panel will be the art of publishing, where we'll discuss kind of the business as a whole. So I will turn it over now to your fabulous moderator, Cari Hunter.
Right, this is the new and upcoming reading panel. So all of our authors have books in the pipeline in the not too distant future, and they will be doing a reading, and then I'll be asking some questions, and I will be keeping an eye on the Q&A where you can ask your own questions, basically. So if you've got anything pressing to ask these lovely authors, stick it in there. If it's a specific one that you want to ask a specific author, stick the name in there, and then I know who I am directing it at. Okay, without further ado, we've gone in alphabetical order. I'm very organised. So our first victim is George Beers, who probably doesn't need any introduction, but I'm going to give one anyway. So George Beers kind of accidentally fell into writing romance. 25 books later, she's still at it and still adores crafting the journey into love that her characters take, because who doesn't love a little romance? She lives in upstate New York, and her goals in life are to drink all the wine, eat all the cheese, and pet all the animals. You can visit her and find out more at www.georgiabeers.com. She's going to be reading from Hopeless Romantic, which is due out in August. Over to you, Georgia.
Cari, I just want you to say my name all the time. It's awesome. All right, I'm going to be reading from Hopeless Romantic, which comes out in August. As Cari said, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the scene, set the scene for you. Leah Scott and her little sister Kelly are at Hopeless Romantic, which is a wedding planner. They are talking to Teddy Baker, who is the owner, and her assistant Preston. This is their second visit. During their first visit, it was pretty well established that there was an off-the-charts attraction between Leah and Teddy. So in this scene, as Kelly talks about her wedding, Leah does what any woman-loving woman would do and stares at Teddy. Teddy was beautiful. Leah took in the ivory sweater dress that Teddy wore, a classic contrast to her olive skin. Gold bangle bracelets jingled softly when she moved her hand. Her hair was down, a soft brown that looked like it might be a shade darker underneath. Subtle brown eyeshadow accentuated the deep dark of Teddy's incredible eyes, and her full lips shone with the glimmer of a coat of lip gloss, just a hint of pink. And it wasn't odd at all that she noticed Teddy's impressive posture, right? Her spine was straight, her shoulders squared the whole time she spoke, twisted, moved her arms. Teddy wasn't tall, but she seemed it. The way someone carried themselves said a lot about them, her mother used to say, and nobody in Leah's recent memory illustrated that point better than Teddy Baker. Her presence said, yes, I know I'm attractive. I also run this show, and I will snap you like a twig if I have to. Leah felt the corners of her mouth tug up at the thought. What are you smiling at? Kelly's question took her by surprise, and Leah sat up a little straighter. Teddy's eyes were on her as well, and Leah swore she could feel them, straight down to her. Just happy to see you happy, she replied, pulling an answer out of her ass so fast she even impressed herself. Teddy's gaze stayed on her for an extra beat. It did things to Leah. Shoulder bumps were Kelly's signature move of affection, and she leaned into Leah with one. Can you give Teddy the deposit? Oh, of course. Leah fished her wallet out of her purse and pulled out her Visa card. Preston took it from her hand and slid it through the square he'd plugged into his tablet. Leah Scott, he said as he watched the transaction on the screen. Your name seems familiar to me. Pretty common name, Leah said. She's a lawyer, Kelly popped in with pride. Oh, yeah? Preston turned the tablet around and pointed. Just sign here with your finger. What kind of lawyer? He asked as she scribbled. I'm a divorce attorney. A heavy coffee mug has to hit the ground just right in order to shatter, and Teddy's apparently had. The sound of the crash startling the other three enough to make them each flinch in their seats. Leah's head whipped around toward Teddy, who sat wide-eyed and seemingly shocked, a Rorschach ink blot of a coffee stain blossoming on her beautiful ivory dress. Oh my God, are you okay? Kelly sprang into action, her kindergarten teacher reflexes kicking into high alert, as they did any time something was spilled or broken. Teddy stood slowly, head down, her focus seemingly on the puddle of coffee and pieces of mug scattered across her hardwood floor. I'm fine. I'm sorry, clumsy. She pointed over her shoulder, blinked several times, never meeting Leah's eyes, then turned on her heel. Preston, set up the next appointment, would you? In the next 3 seconds, she had disappeared into the back. A moment of silence passed before Kelly and Leah exchanged looks. Is she okay? Leah asked Preston. Yeah, I'm sure she's fine. Uncomfortable. It was the only way to describe him. Let's get your next appointment on the schedule. 10 minutes later, Leah and Kelly stood at Kelly's car. That was so weird, Kelly said, pulling the door open and slipping inside. Right? Such a strange reaction to a broken mug. Leah looked back at the storefront. Do you think she cut herself? Or she's allergic to divorce attorneys, Kelly chuckled and started the car. That's when she dropped the mug, you know, when you said you were a divorce attorney. With a snorted laugh, she asked, you didn't handle her divorce or something, did you? Leah blinked at her. Kelly's smile faltered, no longer lighthearted. You didn't, did you? Leah wrinkled her nose and shrugged. Is she divorced? I mean, I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility. Oh my God. Kelly let her forehead fall against the steering wheel, then immediately lifted it up again. Well, we paid a deposit, and she's the best in the business. So let's hope if you did, we can all just remain professional, okay? Yeah, okay. She got me, Leah. Pleading her case, thrilled and happy, excited anticipation. Leah loved seeing those things on her sister's face, hearing them in her voice. She got everything I mentioned. I felt so comfortable with her. I know. I don't want to unhire her. She's exactly what I want. Then we won't. We'll work it out. Don't worry. Words Leah had said to Kelly their entire lives, and she'd always made it so, no matter how much of a pretzel she'd had to twist herself into. She always worked it out for Kelly. Kelly held her gaze for a beat. Okay, I love you. Love you too. Leah slammed Kelly's door and watched her pull away. One last glance at Hopeless Romantic. No Teddy standing in the window like last time. Well, that's a damn shame, she muttered, waiting an extra moment or two just in case. Then she turned away and headed toward her car. She had information to find. The end.
It feels very weird not to applaud. Some audience participation here. Right, we will move on to Jane Fletcher for her reading. Jane Fletcher. Having escaped from London, Jane Fletcher lives with her wife in southwest England. An incurable daydreamer, her love of fantasy was sparked when, aged 7, she first encountered Greek mythology. Her work has won the GCLS and the Alice B. Reader Appreciation Awards. Her 13th novel, Silver Ravens, will be out in July. And that's what you're going to be reading from, isn't it, Jane? There we go. Take it away.
Okay. So I'm reading from Silver Ravens, which is out next month, although I've already got my copy. In the story, my main character is Laurie, and her life isn't going well. Among her problems, she's recently become unemployed. So she's got time on her hands and plays with puzzles in a magazine. To her surprise, she discovers a set of embedded instructions, namely to walk 3 times anti-clockwise around an old standing stone in a churchyard. She suspects it's a joke, or worse, part of a reality TV show, but she's got nothing to lose, so decides to carry out the instructions, which is where this extract starts. The finger of granite stood alone in a corner. The grass around it was clear of gravestones. As Laurie drew closer, a feeling of strangeness grew. A chill breeze carried a wisp of mist past her face. The stone was old, very old. The weight of centuries hung heavily on it. The rustle of the yew tree sounded like murmurs of a long-forgotten language, and she could not shake the idea that the men here knew she was there. Laurie reached out, brushing her hand over the stone. Nothing other than time and the elements had sculptured the rough bases. Another wisp of mist coiled around her fingers. Was it her imagination? The hair rose on her neck. She would have backed away, but a peal of bells rang out, harsh and loud, jerking her back to reality. It was midday. Laurie straightened her shoulders. Time to forget the whimsical nonsense about sentient stones and talking trees. She would do what she came for, and when nothing happened, she would walk away, thankful nobody was around to laugh at her. The mist thickened and the temperature dropped a few degrees as she completed the first circuit. The abruptness of its onset was startling. One more thing to chalk up to climate change. The weather forecasters made no mention of it that morning. The hems of her trousers flapped wet around her ankles, picking up moisture from the grass. Another anti-clockwise circuit, while still the church bell chimed. The mist turned to dense fog. Now she could no longer see the church. Laurie pulled her raincoat tight at her neck and hurried to finish the final circle. The echoes of the last chimes faded away as she returned to her starting point. She had done it. So what now? Laurie peered into the fog, hoping for a figure to emerge. Was anyone there? The conditions made it impossible for an observer to have seen her complete the circuits, but surely whoever it was would take the weather into account. Meanwhile, the fog was lifting, although not as quickly as it had arrived. St. Benedict's Church was a dim shape, seeming smaller and more distant than before. Still nobody came. It was a joke after all. Time to return to her car and go in search of lunch. Laurie clenched her teeth to bite back a selection of obscenities. The prankster should have picked the 1st of April for the hoax. Before leaving the graveyard, she looked back one last time and then pushed open the gate. Directly opposite the church, no more than a dozen steps away, a pub sign hung outside a rustic building. Laurie stared at it. Why had she not spotted the pub before? She was normally more observant, although admittedly on her arrival she had been rather distracted. Hopefully the pub would do food. If the sudden change in weather had caused an accident, driving down to Devon might take hours. Even an orange juice and a packet of cheese and onion crisps would hold her over and give the fog a chance to lift. A breeze sprung up, tearing holes in the mist. Seen more clearly, the outside of the pub did not inspire confidence. Forget the rustic bit. Decrepit was a better word. On second thoughts, did she really want to go in? But the smell of wood smoke cast the deciding vote. An open fire was unusual in May, but the weather definitely warranted it. The chill had etched through to her bones. As Laurie approached the door, creaks from the swaying sign made her look up. The picture was weathered away, but the words were just legible. The halfway house. Of course, the last part of the instructions. Maybe it wasn't a joke after all. Whoever set the puzzles might be inside. Laurie's stomach tightened. The moment had come to discover whether she had been played as a fool. Laurie pushed open the door.
Needs a dun 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 after it. Right, David, you're next. I'm not sure whether you knew you were next, David, but you are next.
That's fine.
Right. David has. Is it Pederson or Pederson?
Pederson with a D, so it's Pederson.
David S. Pederson. David has written many short stories and poems and is passionate about mysteries, old movies, and crime novels. When not reading, writing, or working in the furniture business, David also enjoys working out and studying classic ocean liners for floor plans in historic homes. His third novel, Death Checks In, was a 2019 Lambda Literary Award finalist, and he's now going to be reading From Death Overdue, which is the 5th Detective Heath Barrington mystery, and that's due out in July as well. David, loving the background. Go for your life.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's 7:30 in the morning here, so but I've got my coffee, and we are good. Death Overdue is the 5th, as you said, the 5th installment in my Heath Barrington murder mystery series. Heath is a gay Milwaukee police detective, and it's set in the 1940s. And he's involved with Alan Keyes, a Milwaukee police officer. And in the scene I'm going to be reading from, they're interviewing Evelyn Caldwell. She is a Milwaukee public librarian, and she's a friend of Alice Crow's. And Alice Crow is the wife of the murder victim. So this scene takes place at the library. How did you two meet? You and Alice, I mean. Here at the library. She's a regular. When did you last see her here? I said. The woman moved a pile of books to a cart. She was wearing a dark brown skirt with a matching jacket over a white blouse, buttoned all the way up. At her throat was a cameo. On her feet, flat brown leather loafers, very sensible. She didn't appear to be wearing hosiery. Last Saturday afternoon, the day her husband was murdered, she stayed a couple of hours. Alice is special, a close friend. When it's not busy, we talk sometimes in my office. About what? Books, thoughts, politics. She's quite intelligent, you know. It doesn't come across at first because she's not well educated, but she's smart. There's a difference between educated and intelligent. I quite agree. Did you ever talk about anything else? She talked about her husband sometimes. She was terribly unhappy in her marriage and afraid. She couldn't even bring certain books into their house. She had to hide them in the laundry. Yes, you mentioned that. It's quite sad, I said. It's ridiculous is what it is. Men. She gave each of us a disgusted look in turn. Surely not all men, Ellen said. Enough of them, she replied. You've never married? No, and I don't intend to. I don't need a man. I can take care of myself, and I can take care of Alice better than she can. I told her many times she needed to act on her thoughts, to move. But as a wise person once said, the most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity. An excellent quote, Benjamin Franklin, I believe. You believe incorrectly, detective. It was Amelia Earhart. If you want to check, you can see for yourself in the biography section. I felt myself blush. I stand corrected. I understand Mrs. Crowe received a phone call while she was here that day. Is that right? That's right, she did. It was her husband, and he wanted to talk with her. I took her back to my office so she could have privacy. Did you stay with her? No, I came back to the desk. He actually gave her permission on the phone to return to their apartment because his appointment was over. Can you imagine someone giving you permission to return to your own home? How do you know that's what he said to her? I said. Her eyelids flickered briefly. Well, she must have told me. Or you must have listened in on the extension, I said. Her pale face blushed crimson. Alice is my friend, and she was afraid of her husband, and rightly so. If I listened in, it was only to make sure she was all right. I think I would have done the same in your position, Miss Caldwell, I said. Thank you for that. I think you would have. She told me she needed to leave, so she gathered up her things, checked out the book she'd been reading, and left. And that was about 2:30? That's right. She seemed fretful and had a fresh bruise under her eye. It made my blood boil. Understandable. I can't imagine being married to Larry Crowe, I said. It must have been awful. You're lucky you're a man. I suppose I am. I glanced over at Ellen and back to her. Some people think so anyway. Have you ever been to the Crowe apartment? No. I admit I went over once or twice and hung around outside. I wanted to see what Larry Crowe looked like, and maybe try to talk to him if I got the chance, but I decided it would probably do more harm than good, so I never did. Did Mrs. Crowe ever mention a Mr. Jarvis? He's a grocer who made a delivery to their apartment last Saturday, the day of the murder. Miss Caldwell blinked several times and brought her right hand up to her cameo, which she fiddled with absent-mindedly. Jarvis? No, I don't think so. Why? Just wondering. Do you know him at all? Me? No. Why would I? I live in the opposite direction, and I do my marketing closer to home. Of course. Apparently this Mr. Jarvis and Mr. Crowe didn't care for each other much. I think there were many people who did. I don't think there were many people who did care for Mr. Crowe, she said. Just like library books, detective, we all have due dates. Lawrence Crowe's was a death overdue. Thank you.
My cat deciding she was going to join our panel during that reading.
Nice.
It's positive.
Aw, so cute.
Right, Justine Saracen. Justine Saracen, one of Ballstrokes' old hands, her words, not mine, who's been putting out lesbian historical novels for over a decade. She's written about the crucifixion, the Crusades, Michelangelo's Rome, Venice, Nazi Germany, Stalin's Russia, etc., etc. But mostly she's written about World War II. Invasions, monumental heroes and villains, bombardments, blood and gore, and lesbians. Turns out you can make love and war at the same time. Her latest novel is To Sleep with Reindeer, war resistance while struggling for survival in the Norwegian tundra, living with the reindeer and fighting Nazis, and passion under the northern lights. What's not to love? Justine is going to be reading from To Sleep with Reindeer, which is due out in October and has a beautiful cover. Justine, have you got a...
Yeah, let me show you. First of all, I want to apologize for relocating. I was out in my garden amidst all of my beautiful flowers, but it's nice weather outside. On the one side, the neighbors are having a party. The other side, the children are out playing and screaming. So, and I even got muted by the host because there was so much noise going on. So that's where we're here now, inside. Okay, here is the cover.
There you go.
I also like covers. I mean, I didn't design it. I just requested the Northern Lights, and I think it's really a beautiful cover. Okay, so, but I'm not going to read from it. I think this doesn't suit me to read. It can be tedious. So I'd like to talk about it, though, for my 3 to 5 minutes to give you a sense of what it's about, because it's not out until October anyhow. It's 2 things. It is historically, because all my novels are historical. It is an account of real events. The British Secret Service, aided by Norwegians, attempted to halt the production of heavy water in Norway, which the Nazis were using for the development and research into the atomic bomb. And all the details of that leading up to that are historical, except for the fact that there weren't any women, but I put some in. The heavy water, those of you who don't know what it is, it's actually heavy hydrogen, and instead of H2O, it's D2O, deuterium and oxygen water. And it's necessary for buffering when you do research for in an atomic pile. The second focus of the novel is a cross-country romance between a British woman who was with the Secret Service and a woman from the Lapland, the indigenous Laplanders. They call themselves Sami. And I'm wearing, in tribute to them, I'm wearing a Sami smock. Now, historically, and I found this fascinating because there's even been a movie made of part of what they did. The British forces made 3 attempts on the power plant at Vemork in Norway to halt the production of heavy water. And the first one was a total disaster. The planes crashed. The entire team was killed, if not immediately. They were captured and killed by the Germans. So that was a total disaster. And the second attempt was a success, an apparent success, with no casualties, and it was made into a movie, in fact, called The Heroes of Telemark. You might have even heard of it. But it was limited in its effect because the Germans soon were producing heavy water again. So it was basically for nothing. The final success was successful. Terminated the program, but at the cost of many Norwegian lives, including the ex-lover of the heroine of my novel. So the whole idea of collateral damage is approached, and collateral damage is not just a military expression when one of the people killed is someone you love. So I deal with that theme. The cross-cultural romance is between a British woman, Kirsten, and a woman herder, a reindeer herder among the Sami. Her name is Marit. The heroine, Kirsten, crashes in the first attempt and survives, although in fact no one survived, but in my novel she survives. But she nearly dies in the snow because this is up in the Arctic part of Norway. She's rescued by a family of Sami, reindeer herders, but she's injured, and she's put into a sled in which there's an injured reindeer calf. So she's injured and the calf is injured. So the whole novel begins with her sleeping with a reindeer. So she's carried back to the encampment, and she spends a lot of time with the Sami because she's injured. But because she has a mission, she necessarily has to involve the Sami people in the mission. And by doing so, she inadvertently brings about their demise. Again, the whole question of collateral damage. Is it worth it to stop the heavy water program if it means being responsible for the deaths of dozens of indigenous people? She lives with the Sami in the snow, and lots of snow, and lots of snow. And so I hope my reader gets an experience of what it's like to live as an indigenous Sami. And that's the core of it. So I won't read from it because that's even more boring than hearing me talk about it.
I think it sounds interesting.
I think we're all learning a lot there. Right.
So
we'll come back and talk about all these. Sorry? What did you say, Justine?
I said I yield my time if I have anything left.
We'll come back and talk about all these books. Don't worry, we're going to come back to them. I just want to make sure that everybody gets their chance to read. So last but not least, we have Anne Shade. Anne Shade is an incurable romantic who believes there is no limit to love. She is dedicated to writing romances that show women who love women in a loving and positive light. When she isn't writing, she reads fantasy novels and helps make couples' wedding dreams a reality. She's going to be reading from Masquerade. We had a last-minute switch, didn't we? You're going to read Masquerade, yeah? Yes. Which is due out in February. So, Anne, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I will be reading from Masquerades. My upcoming novel, I believe, comes out in February. Don't quote me on that. It comes out next year, next winter. It is a historical novel that takes place during the 1920s, late 1920s to 30s, during the Harlem Renaissance in New York. And during that time, being gay was a fad. It was real popular as long as you didn't decide to live that lifestyle. And masquerade balls were also, drag masquerade balls were also popular during that time. So my characters, Celine and Dinah, this is going to be when they first meet, which is going to be at a masquerade ball. They're both wearing masks, so they don't know that they realize that they know each other. They have met before, but this is their first meeting. Celine spent the first hour of the party at a corner table, nursing a glass of wine and wondering when she would be able to make an escape. Her aunt had been right. This was much different than the masquerade she went to in New Orleans. She thought she could handle it. Taking a new name would make her braver, but she was wrong. Most of the guests were in drag, with men in some of the finest gowns she had ever seen, and women dressed in elegant tuxedos with tails and carrying walking sticks. But there were those that chose to display their uninhibited side that evening by barely wearing any clothes at all. One very shapely woman wore a shimmering sheer gown that left little to the imagination, while another wore a similar one that had well-placed patches of silk leaves sewn over the most revealing areas. It wasn't just the provocative clothing that had Celine's senses in overdrive. The large, formerly private mansion turned social club was dimly lit with low lights and scented candles that left her more lightheaded than the wine did. Each of the 4 main rooms was decorated in an exotic theme focusing on Asia, India, Africa, and a French boudoir. It was an environment that beckoned hedonism and wild abandon, neither of which her cultured Creole sensibilities was used to. She sat in the African-themed ballroom, watching everything from her little corner table in the back of the room, too afraid of getting up to venture out and join the other revelers. She almost jumped out of her seat when someone sat beside her before she realized it was her aunt. "Too much for you?" her aunt asked. Celine looked nervously around the room. "It is a bit overwhelming." "What happened to the bold Camille?" Celine gazed down at her glass of wine in embarrassment. "Camille seems to have completely abandoned me." "I see. Well, you are more than welcome to retire to the room we used upstairs if you've had your fill." Celine frowned. "Are you sure? After all my talk, I feel like such a coward." Her aunt waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. You've lasted much longer than most newcomers." "Thank you, Aunt." Just as Celine stood to leave, the lights in the room dimmed even more, and music from tuxedo-clad, all-female jazz band changed from a swing beat to a subtle jungle drum beat. "It's too bad you're going to miss the entertainment," her aunt said. An excited murmur traveled through the crowd as a spotlight shone just past where Celine and her aunt stood. It seemed every person in the room turned in Celine's direction, gazing at something behind her. As she turned to see what everyone was looking at, a pathway cleared for the cloaked figure of a woman entering the room from a nearby doorway. Celine watched as the figure drew closer and found herself mesmerized by how it seemed the woman floated instead of walked towards her. She halted just as she passed Celine and gazed back over her shoulder at her. Celine's breath caught in her throat as she saw the sparkle of deep brown eyes peering at her through a feathered mask. The very mask her aunt had asked her to make that afternoon, but refused to say who it was for. She gazed down at the front of the cloak, knowing what lay beneath, the matching top and bottom of the feathered costume she had created. She found herself wanting to rip open the cloak to see the body of the woman who wore it. Her imagination had run wild, wondering what this woman looked like as she worked on the costume, causing her to prick her fingers several times with the sewing needle. She had quite literally poured blood, sweat, and tears into that costume. When she looked up, the woman smiled seductively, then turned away and continued her spotlighted, slow, sexy stroll to the center of the room. "She's known as Sable," Celine's aunt whispered in her ear. "We should move closer for a better view." Celine didn't argue. She just let her aunt guide her through the crowd until they somehow ended up in the front. The rhythmic drumming that had been playing during Sable's entrance stopped as she slowly shed her long cloak to the delight of her audience. But no one was more affected by her appearance than Celine. Sable's long, lithe, muscular dancer's body and dark pecan complexion shone iridescently in the light. The way the leather of the feathered brassiere and shorts cupped her breast and behind so perfectly had Celine flushed with heat. Suddenly, a lonely trumpet wail filled the now hushed room, and Sable began a slow, graceful dance in response. The rhythmic drums joined in once again, and her movements grew wilder, more seductive, as her body gyrated and swayed in a provocative dance that left every man and woman watching heated with desire. At the height of her dance, she turned directly towards Celine. The trumpet stopped, leaving only the drum's cadence in its wake. It played a slow jungle beat as Celine reached her arm towards Celine, beckoning her forward. That's it. Thank you.
Right, let's crack on with some questions. I'm actually going to pinch one from the reader Q&A, first of all, because it's such a good one. So this is from Cari McNair, and it's for Georgia. "We know that you love a good glass of wine. So if you were a wine, how would you describe yourself?" Pick a vintage.
I can tell you how I would like people to think of me if I was wine. Does that count? I would say, I would say full-bodied, semi-sweet, with a lingering finish.
Right. I'm struggling to rearrange my questions here because Molly went to sleep on my arm and drooled all over me. Right. I have a question for Georgia. We'll start with Georgia again. Are you a hopeless romantic?
Yes, I am. Absolutely. Yeah. Without a doubt. I don't know if that's good or bad, but yes.
To be fair, I suppose you have to be to write, or is it 25 romance novels?
Yeah, I think
can't be
it helps. I think it definitely helps.
Can't be a cynical old bugger, can you? Right, Jane. Your forthcoming book, Silver Ravens, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Plays on Welsh mythology to set up a fantasy world of your own invention.
Yeah.
How do you find the balance between reshaping folk tales and giving rein to your own imagination?
I take what I want from the myths and use it. And it's fun when you can twist bits in. So, as a character, Morgan Le Fay, there's Arthurian myth. I know the mythology. I know the bits of it. It's the fact you can do what you want with mythology so that you can rework it. I mean, one of the examples would be in the Larmouth series. I've got dwarves. Now, dwarves are they're a stable fantasy element. If you read Norse mythology, there's only ever male dwarves. There's never any female dwarves. How you cope with it is pretty much up to you. Tolkien said that female dwarves are actually very, very rare. Terry Pratchett said actually female dwarves are indistinguishable from male dwarves until he took their clothes off. And my dwarves were hermaphrodites. If you know the mythology, you can play around with it. You know what the canon, this sort of mythological creature or myth is, and you can twist it as you like, as long as you know the myth and you're not actually breaking any of the cast iron rules. And having female dwarves, although that does tend to come into modern sword and sorcery, is actually non-canon if you look back to the Norse mythology it comes from.
Bits and pieces off your website. You say on your website that you love to travel, which is kind of a bit awkward at the moment. Do you think readers will use books as a way to travel and escape what's going on? Are you doing that yourself? And if so, where have you been recently? So what have you read recently that's taken you traveling somewhere? It can be a different era, a different country.
Who's the question for?
David.
Sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry.
we lost the first second or so.
I was going to say, sorry. Did you hear the question, David?
I did, yes, thank you. Sorry. I do love to travel, and actually in about 20 minutes I'm leaving for Arizona, so I'll be driving. So it's a 27-hour drive. But yeah, I always love to escape in my books. Any book I read, I love Agatha Christie. I love England. It's always been dear to my heart. I have some very good friends that live in St. Albans that I haven't seen in a while. I'd love to see them again. So any Agatha Christie novel always takes me there, and I love to do my research. So when I travel, I try to make it also a little bit of a research trip so that I can discover new places and new settings for my books. I'm currently working on a book that actually takes place in England. So the characters are going to be sailing over on the Queen Mary in 1937, and they end up staying at an English estate. So that'll be coming out too, probably next year. So that's exciting. So yeah, travel is a big part of me, and I think the world is a big place, and there's such a lot of world to see, as they said in Moon River, and I think that's a good philosophy to live in. And the more world we experience, the more we find that we're all more alike than not alike. And I think that's a real important thing to find out.
Have you been to Lapland in the snow? You mentioned loads of snow. And if so, apart from buying your wonderful outfit, what did you do there?
Yes, I've been in Lapland. And I went in the winter when they had a record amount of snow. A record amount of snow in Lapland is a lot of snow. It's eyebrow high snow. I went, of course, as a tourist necessarily, but I went on a dog sled. I went to a reindeer farm. I met Sami, went to a Sami museum. I did everything you could other than live with the Sami, which you can't do because there's hardly any Sami left now. They've largely, the Sami are pretty much like, say, Navajo Indians are in the United States. They're very much subsumed into the mainstream culture. And where there are pure Sami, they're very far away and really not accessible. So I got as close to the Sami culture as I could as an American tourist. I ate lots of reindeer.
That's going to be my next question.
They herd reindeer, but they eat, in fact, I mean, like Native Americans did, their entire culture was based on the reindeer, as Western Native Americans based their culture on buffalo. So yes, and I have to say that reindeer meat, it's okay. It's not as good as a good steak, but it's okay.
Somebody's asked, can you hear me? Do they grill the reindeer?
They do everything with the reindeer. There's a restaurant. I happened to stop purely by accident with my friend outside of a series of restaurants, and she said, "Where do you want to eat?" And I said, "Let's try reindeer." And she said, "Where is there a reindeer restaurant?" And I just did a pivot to my left, and there was a sign that said reindeer restaurant, literally reindeer restaurant. And they only had reindeer, about 100 varieties of reindeer, and one of them was grill. You can get reindeer pizza, reindeer spaghetti, reindeer matzo balls. You can do anything with it.
Right, I don't know how to follow that up really. Anne, let's go on to you. I've got Masquerade is a historical romance set in Harlem, 1921. Yeah. Yes. What kind of research did you find yourself doing to get the details right? And did you learn anything surprising about the period that you didn't know at all while you were working on the book?
I've always been fascinated by African American history, my culture. So the research I did was very intensive, very fun. I read a lot of books, went to the library, did quite a bit of research, went to Harlem, and they have several the Schomburg Museum and several museums that have such history on it. And one of the things I learned was how extensive the gay culture was. Like I said, it was a fad to be gay, but you couldn't actually be gay. So you could have, I have a gay friend, or I have, I go to these gay parties and the masquerade balls. Even a lot of straight people, did a lot of the drag and masquerade balls. And went to those parties, and it was very much a popular thing to do back then. But people were still getting arrested for it. People were still not able to, if they were honestly trying to live their lives this way, weren't able to, but it was a fashion statement, and that surprised me about that, especially in the United States, but in how heavily the culture was within the Renaissance movement itself, which was very, very interesting to me.
Not a period I would know anything about, so I'll need to read your book and find out the answers to all my questions.
Yes.
Okay, this is from Jem in the Q&A panel. It's a bit of a topical one. She's read something this week about a no pubs, no kissing rule in near future romance novels. Do you guys plan to change up how characters go about their romances if you write about 2020 and characters finding love during COVID-19? I guess in terms of who writes sort of modern day romances, that's one for Georgia.
You know, that's an interesting question, and I really go back and forth because it's a huge deal and you can't really ignore it, but at the same time, the main purpose of a romance is for escapism. So if I pick up a romance, I don't want to read about people who can't touch and can't kiss. And, do you know what I mean? So it's a difficult one. The book that I'm currently writing, my main character works in a doctor's office. She's like the office manager. So I kind of had to mention it, but in the book we've moved on from COVID. Which I'm hoping that, you know, we get to some semblance of normalcy at that point, but I don't know that I would make it that big of a topic in my books. That's a really good question. I haven't really thought about it. I probably should, but I want my people to be able to hug and kiss and touch and sit next to each other and, you know, hold hands, and I don't know.
It's like the elephant in the room.
Exactly.
Go on, Justine.
Write about people who've recovered from it. There's millions of people who've recovered from it. Then they can touch each other all over.
It's true.
Unless their partner's not had it, in which case you're kind of still a little bit on dodgy ground there. Okay, one here for Joni, and I'm going to ask it to Jane as one of our veteran writers. Some of you have been writing for over 15 years. Have you noticed a difference with how you interact with readers? Does this affect how you decide what to write or how you approach new projects? So do your readers' kind of feedback maybe influence what you write?
There's been no real difference. I mean, the level of feedback. I mean, even when I started writing, I was getting emails. So, you know, maybe slightly fewer emails. There's Facebook, but there's this degree of the amount of electronic feedback hasn't really changed. The number of conferences and things I attend hasn't really changed. Feedback from readers doesn't really impact books normally, but I don't remember. I was planning on. I wanted to do a sequel to the second in the Lionmouth series, and I had vague ideas. I was knocking around. It wasn't quite there. And somebody wrote me that they'd love to have dragons in a book. And so I thought, well, what would dragons be in this world? And it just slotted perfectly into plot. The whole plot just fell into place. I thought, hey, I can now write this. I said, I get the whole plot before I start writing. There's a big hole in the middle of the plot. And I hadn't known what had to go in there. It was a dragon. I put the dragon in there and that was it. The plot was done.
Credit the reader. Did you credit the reader, Jane?
No.
Stole their dragon, didn't credit them.
I may have replied to the email saying, that's a great idea. I think I might put a dragon in, but no.
I pinched it. Okay, Anne, you've got a book of, your first book was short stories, wasn't it? Femme Tales?
Yes.
Which retold fairy tales with a modern twist. Yes. What was it about fairy tales that inspired you to put your spin on them? Was there something particular that you wanted to correct? Something that you just like about fairy tales that you feel, you know, earn a modern twist?
Like Georgia, I'm an incurable romantic. You know, I love fairy tales. I love the starting with the automatic love and attraction and ending on a happy note. So since I love writing romances as well, I figured, well, I can incorporate the two. And I incorporated my 3 favorite, which were Beauty and the Beast, Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella. And I decided, you know, it needed a nice modern twist, and it needed to be put in a way that even, you know, even gay women can enjoy. So I made the characters, of course, African-American lesbians. So I put a huge twist on it. I made it all African-American characters. I made them lesbian. I put it modern, but I kept the premises of the story, which is the first one with Beast is Beauty pretty much conquers the Beast, and the Beast is more within than out. So it's more of an internal beast than an outward beast. And then with Awaken, I had to find a way to twist it where, because with Sleeping Beauty, they fall in love after the kiss. So that didn't seem to make sense to me, because how do you wake up in love with someone you've never met? So they have a brief meeting, and then I won't say the sleeping part because you have to read the book. And with Cinderella, or with the Cinderella, which is called Stiletto, I wanted to make Cinderella more powerful or a stronger woman. I don't think Cinderella was very strong in the fairy tale because she was pretty much browbeaten and beat down by her stepmother. So this Cinderella is not browbeaten or beat down, and she won't allow anyone to be that way, but she still needs her heart rescued.
Okay, this one from Heidi. For all authors, but I'll just throw it to David because he's got the whole genre thing going on behind him. When you get time to read someone else's novels, what genre do you read? Do you stick with your kind of hard-boiled detective novels, or do you know, read fantasy just for a change or whatever?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. I love mysteries, obviously. I think I mentioned before I love Agatha Christie, but I also love romance. I got to read some of George's because I'm a hopeless romantic as well.
Awesome.
When I first met my husband, we've been together 26 years.
Nice.
I gave him a rose every month for a year. So I gave him 1 rose, and then on the second month, I gave him 2 roses, all up to 12. So something worked. So yeah, I love romance novels, and I love mysteries. I love all different kinds of genres. So, but yeah, definitely, I try to read a wide variety of things. So,
a 3-minute warning here. So just pick one more question if we can. Okay, Justine, favorite character to have developed?
Favorite of my characters?
Uh-huh.
All of them. Because I live them when I'm writing them, and I like them so much that they're still there. So they're all different facets of me, and I think they're all pretty sexy. And I that is to say, when I'm them, I'm pretty sexy. So all of them.
You're living the dream through your characters. That's great.
Yes,
right,
yes.
we are kind of on the last minute. I have to mention that the upcoming panel is Danger and Passion, with Radcliffe, Robin Nitz, Carson Tate, Ali Valley, Ileandra Young, Jane Fletcher. I believe you're moderating for that one. Good luck keeping them in check. And that starts at 14:30, so 2:30. So you've got 10 minutes to go for a wee break, make a brew. I would love to say thank you to all of the panelists and everybody who has been feeding the questions through. Sorry I didn't get round to everybody, but it was great to know that you're all here and taking part. It's been blissful. Lovely to meet you all, the ones that I've never met before. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.